Alright travelers, today we're diving into something that every Genshin player needs to know. The Remembrance of Jade and Stone banner. This is part of Genshin Impact's new chronicled wish system, and let me tell you, if you've ever cried over missing a limited time weapon, this is your second chance. Whether you're a veteran who skipped some banners or a newer player still building your dream arsenal, this banner is packed with fan-favorite weapons that are making a glorious comeback. We're talking about some seriously legendary options here. Polar Star, Primordial Jade Cutter, and a whole collection of iconic 5 stars and 4 stars that were once locked behind time-limited walls. Today, we're going through every single weapon in the Remembrance of Jade and Stone lineup, so you know exactly what's up for grabs and whether you should throw your precious Primogems at it. Let's get into it. I'm quickly moving on to the video. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. Let's talk about Memory of Dust, one of the 3 weapons in Genshin Impact's Remembrance of Jade and Stone series, all of which are tied to Liyue's very own Geo Archon, Rex Lapis. You probably know him better as Zhongli, the man with a voice smooth enough to convince you to empty your Primogems. This weapon's whole identity is centered around ATK. It gives you a solid base ATK and an ATK% substat on top of that. So right off the bat, it's clear this thing wants to hit hard, and it's not exactly subtle about it. Now, where things get interesting is with the passive. Memory of Dust actually shares the same style of passive as the other 2 weapons in this set, Vortex Vanquisher and Summit Shaper. Basically, you get stronger shields just by holding it, and whenever you land a hit on an enemy, your ATK goes up. It's like the weapon's hyping you up every time you swing. Oh, and if you're protected by a shield, that ATK boost gets even bigger, because why not reward you for playing into the Geo Nation's favorite mechanic? The catch? Well, Memory of Dust really wants you to live inside a bubble. Without a shield, you're missing out on a good chunk of its power. That makes it perfect for characters like Ningguang or Yanfei, who can easily team up with shielders like Zhongli himself. Overall, it's a weapon that hits like a truck if you build around it. But if you're not a fan of shielding up 24/7, you might find it a little needy. It's a love letter to Liyue's sturdy, defense-heavy playstyle. And honestly, it's a fun piece of Genshin's lore turned into gameplay. Let's talk about Summit Shaper, a weapon that feels like it's having a bit of an identity crisis. On paper, it's got decent stats. The base ATK is solid, and it comes with an ATK sense substat, which sounds nice. Until you remember that ATK isn't exactly the hottest stat in Genshin right now. Characters who want ATK already get plenty from their artifacts, and weapons with crit rate or crit DMG are almost always a better pick. But Summit Shaper doesn't stop there. It also locks part of its passive behind a shield condition, because of course, we needed more hoops to jump through for a weapon that's already kinda mid. Now to be fair, Summit Shaper isn't trash. If you don't have other 5-star options, it can definitely outshine most 4-star weapons. But here's the catch. This is a limited 5-star weapon, meaning you have to actually spend Primogems to pull for it. And that's where things get awkward. When you compare it to standard banner 5 stars like Primordial Jade Cutter or even Skyward Blade, Summit Shaper just feels unnecessary. It's the kind of weapon that you'd use if you happen to pull it, not something you'd ever intentionally chase. At the end of the day, Summit Shaper feels like the devs wanted to make a weapon that fits the whole Liyue elegance vibe, but they kind of forgot to make it strong enough to justify pulling for. Unless you're collecting weapons for fashion or you just love the design, this is one weapon you can skip without any regrets. There are just too many better options out there. Even some 4 stars will do the job better. Alright, let's talk about the Unforged, the forgotten child of Liyue's weapon series. If you've ever pulled on a banner and ended up with this big golden slab instead of something you actually wanted, you're not alone. And you're probably still a little salty about it. The Unforged is part of what I like to call the Shield Trio, alongside Vortex Vanquisher and Summit Shaper, and all 3 of them share the same weird identity crisis. They boost shield strength, but not in a way that actually helps your teammates, and they want you to play around shields to get some extra ATK. Sounds decent in theory, but in practice, it's just kinda awkward. Now here's the thing. Out of the 3, the Unforged might actually be the least terrible, and that's because it has some real synergy with a few characters who actually care about both shields and ATK scaling. Noelle, for example, can work with it since her whole thing revolves around shielding and smacking enemies with her def to ATK conversion. Kinich, the newcomer, can also make use of it in a pinch thanks to how his kit interacts with shields. So yeah, the Unforged isn't completely useless. It's just really picky about who can make it shine. That said, would I recommend pulling for it? Absolutely not. It's still one of those weapons you'd rather lose the 50-50 away from. But if you somehow end up with it, or if you're a Noelle main who loves weird builds, it's not the end of the world. It's like that one awkward cousin at family reunions. Nobody's excited to see them, but they're not that bad once you give them a chance. It's just, there are way better options out there. So unless you're feeling spicy, leave this one in the vault. Alright, let's talk about the Unforged, the forgotten child of Liyue's weapon series. If you've ever pulled on a banner and ended up with this big golden slab instead of something you actually wanted, you're not alone, and you're probably still a little salty about it. The Unforged is part of what I like to call the Shield Trio, alongside Vortex Vanquisher and Summit Shaper, and all three of them share the same weird identity crisis. They boost shield strength, but not in a way that actually helps your teammates, and they want you to play around shields to get some extra ATK. Sounds decent in theory, but in practice, it's just kinda awkward. Now here's the thing. Out of the three, the Unforged might actually be the least terrible, and that's because it has some real synergy with a few characters who actually care about both shields and ATK scaling. Noelle, for example, can work with it since her whole thing revolves around shielding and smacking enemies with her def to ATK conversion. Keenich, the newcomer, can also make use of it in a pinch, thanks to how his kit interacts with shields. So yeah, the Unforged isn't completely useless. It's just really picky about who can make it shine. That said, would I recommend pulling for it? Absolutely not. It's still one of those weapons you'd rather lose the 50-50 away from. But if you somehow end up with it, or if you're a Noelle main who loves weird builds, it's not the end of the world. It's like that one awkward cousin at family reunions. Nobody's excited to see them, but they're not that bad once you give them a chance. It's just, there are way better options out there, so unless you're feeling spicy, leave this one in the vault. Alright, let's talk about Jadefall's Splendor, aka Baiju's fancy signature weapon that, well, let's be honest, barely anyone else wants to touch. On paper, this thing looks like it could work for other Catalyst characters thanks to that HP substat. I mean, Neuvillette and Mualani both scale off HP, so you'd think this could be a nice alternative if you're out of options. But the truth? It's a bit of a trap. The weapon's passive relies entirely on generating shields every 3 seconds, and if you're not Baiju, good luck keeping that going consistently. That's really the core problem here. The passive is tailor-made for Baiju, and pretty much useless for everyone else. If you throw this on someone like Neuvillette, you're just left with a fancy stat stick, and even then, there are way better options. What makes it worse is that this isn't some standard banner weapon you can stumble across randomly. Nope, you have to go out of your way to wish for it, which makes its awkward design even more painful. Now don't get me wrong, Jadefall's Splendor isn't completely worthless. If you're a hardcore Baiju enjoyer, this thing is perfect for him. But for the rest of the roster, it's a collector's piece at best. Honestly, if you're looking for a smart pull, Amos's bow would do you way more favors, and that one can at least show up on the standard banner. So unless you've got an overflowing Primogem stash and a deep love for Baiju, this is one weapon you can safely skip. Alright, let's talk about the Primordial Jade Winged Spear, or PJWS if you want to sound fancy. This is Xiao's signature polearm, but don't let that fool you into thinking it only works for him. In fact, this weapon is basically one of those I'm not special, but I'm really good at everything type of deals. It doesn't have any crazy unique synergy with a particular character, but the sheer amount of crit rate and high base ATK it gives makes it a fantastic slap-it-on-and-go weapon for anyone who just wants to hit things harder. It's one of the best general DPS polearms in the game, and it's been holding that title for a long time. Now here's the fun part. You don't even need to pull for it directly most of the time. Since PJWS is a standard banner weapon, you could just randomly end up with it after losing your 50-50 or while casually spending your free pulls. That's why it's not really something you want to target with your precious Primogems. But if it lands in your hands, oh, you're set. This spear isn't picky. It'll happily work with most DPS polearm characters, even if they're not from Liyue. It's like that one friend who's down to hang out no matter what the plan is. And let's not forget the passive. Every time you hit an enemy, you get a little ATK boost. And when you hit enough times, you get a bonus damage multiplier on top of it. It's simple, it's effective, and it rewards you for doing what you were already gonna do. Smack enemies repeatedly. Combine that with its naturally high stats, and you've got a weapon that's easy to use, fun to play with, and always reliable. It's not flashy, but it's the kind of weapon that just quietly carries your team without demanding attention. Classic Liu craftsmanship right there. Alright, let's talk about the Primordial Jade Cutter. One of those weapons in Genshin Impact that always sparks some debate. It's part of the same Jade family as the Primordial Jade Winged Spear, and yeah, they definitely share some vibes. Both have that slick green aesthetic, and both come with a built-in crit rate substat, which already makes them super appealing. I mean, who doesn't love free crit rate? But where the Winged Spear leans heavily into raw ATK buffs, the Jade Cutter takes a bit of a detour, and honestly, that's what makes it so interesting. See, the passive on the Jade Cutter gives you bonus HP, and then it converts that HP into even more ATK. It's like the weapon is saying, healthy characters hit harder, which is a fun twist compared to your usual stat stick sword. What this means in practice is that characters who naturally scale off HP, like Kamisato Ayato or even Alhaitham in certain builds, can make especially good use of it. But don't get it twisted, this sword isn't just for HP scaling characters. It's flexible enough that you could slap it on almost any DPS sword user and they'd still pop off. Now, compared to the Primordial Jade Winged Spear, I'd say the Jade Cutter isn't quite as universally cracked. But, and this is a big but, since the spear is permanently available on the standard banner, getting your hands on the sword might actually feel more rewarding. It's not locked into the standard pool, so when it comes back, it's a pretty tempting pull. If you're looking for a sword that works on almost anyone, adds survivability, and still pumps out damage, the Jade Cutter's one of those weapons that you just don't regret pulling for. Let's talk about the Polar Star, because if you're into bows in Genshin Impact, this one's a pretty big deal. This is Tartaglia's signature weapon, straight from the Fatui's Golden Boy himself. And it's got the stats to back up that reputation. We're talking high base ATK, a sweet crit rate boost, and a passive that's basically a love letter to characters who rely on their skills to dish out damage. Whether you're running Child himself or anyone else who loves spamming abilities, Polar Star's got you covered. Now, what makes Polar Star really stand out is how it boosts your elemental skill and burst damage. And it does that just by existing in your hands. On top of that, there's a little bonus mechanic where you gain extra ATK percent when you meet certain conditions. And don't worry, they're not some weird obscure requirements. Just hit enemies with your normal attacks, charged attacks, elemental skill, and burst. That's it. Do what you're already doing, and Polar Star pays you for it. Not a bad deal, right? So, if you're the kind of player who wants to squeeze every bit of damage out of your bow characters, Polar Star is honestly one of the best options out there. It's strong, it's reliable, and it rewards you just for playing the game the way you already do. Plus, let's be real. There's something extra satisfying about flexing with Child's signature weapon on someone else entirely. It's like borrowing your rich friend's designer watch and wearing it better than they do. Classic Genshin flex. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.